Bismillah walhamdulillah wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wasallam. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Peace and blessings be upon you all. Firstly, a huge welcome to all 500 of you who are joining us from literally all over the globe. Alhamdulillah, we have attendees from the United States, South Africa, Canada, India, Japan, Netherlands, China, all the way across to Australia. A brief introduction about myself. I'm Mudassar, the co-chair of the EY Muslim community here. And we are very proud to be hosting this event today with a panel of excellent speakers joining us, and with the incredible support and help of the CMS Muslim Network, who have organized this event in conjunction with us. Unfortunately, one of our guests, Samina Akram, was unable to join us tonight due to some technical difficulties, but she sent through her personal greetings to all our panelists as well as to all the attendees. In a week where retail investors have been taking on hedge funds on Wall Street and all the fiasco that's going on right now, I don't think we could have had a better time to run an event on Islamic finance and its need in modern corporate society. We have a really packed agenda lined up for you, and a final bit of housekeeping from me in reminding everyone that all speakers here today are expressing their personal views, and as such, anything discussed should not be taken as professional advice. With that, I'd like to hand over to our host for the evening, Selena Sharma, who's a manager at EY and is the ex-co-chair of the EY Muslim community. Over to you, Selena.
Jazakallah khair, Mudassar. Assalamu alaikum and good evening to you all. Like Mudassar said, my name is Selena and I'll be hosting today's event. By way of background, I'm a manager within EY's risk management department, and I'm also a long-standing member of the EY Muslim community, having previously held the co-chair role myself too. I have to say that I've really been looking forward to today's event to not only listen to our lineup of subject matter experts, but to also learn more about the various aspects of Islamic finance. Before handing over to our first speaker, I'd like to encourage you all to post your questions in the message panel throughout today's session. If desired, you can post your questions anonymously. And once our speakers are finished speaking, I'll be pulling out some of these questions and we'll be putting them to our speakers before we close. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Mufti Faraz Adli. Mufti Faraz is the CEO of Amanah Advisors and is a Sharia advisor to various Islamic financial institutions and Fintech organizations. His extensive qualifications in Islamic finance and studies, mashallah, has given him a wealth of knowledge, and we're very appreciative that he has agreed to share his knowledge today by talking us through the principles and themes underlining Islamic finance and how they manifest in practice. Mufti Faraz, over to you.
Thank you very much, Jazakallah khair. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. It's an honor and a privilege to be here with you all. I'd like to thank the organizers for organizing this brilliant event. And I'd like to greet my fellow panel members who are well-renowned and experts in their fields as well. So it's an honor and a privilege for me to be with you all. My real 15-20 minutes is just about setting the scene and understanding what is Islamic finance all about? What underpins this entire industry? What's the philosophy? What's the vision? Right? What is it trying to achieve? What is it seeking to promote and establish? See, Islam is a life project, right? What I mean by that, it's not simply a ritual practice or spiritual exercise, right? Islam is a life project. It has objectives. It has a vision for real impact in people's lives. And these principles, these visions, these objectives, they shape our worldview, our conduct, our behavior, right? And that's why when we talk about the word Sharia, right? Sharia is like a taboo word, unfortunately. But what does it really mean? Right? Linguistically, Sharia in Arabic means a path to a source of water. So why has the word Sharia now been used to denote and relate to Islamic law and the governance system? What's the connection between the linguistic meaning and the technical meaning? Because how the Arabic language works is always a connection, is always a relationship. So the reason why Sharia is called Sharia, and we know it as Islamic law, is because just as the path to water is a means, it facilitates well-being, sustainability. Likewise, this Sharia, these principles that we have, this code of conduct that we have, is a means to facilitate sustainability, well-being of the community, of the society, of the financial markets. That's why it's called Sharia. It's the path to life. Just like Sharia in the linguistic meaning is the path to water, and as we know, wherever there's water, you'll see birds flying and hovering above. Likewise, Sharia is called Sharia because it's a means to bring life into people, bring life into the markets, bring life in societies and communities. When there's no life, things are dead. And that's why Sharia is called Sharia. And Islam has, lessons for every part of our lives. If it's, for example, the institution of nikah and marriage, why is that there? Why has Islam given us that? It's so that we can fulfill our daily needs. We gain comfort, peace, strength from our partners. Zakat, sadaqah, waqf. Why is all of those institutions there? It's there to ensure there's a system to redistribute wealth. Right? Finance is no different. Finance is there. Islamic finance is there to ensure that we can fulfill our needs without causing harm to others. You and I and every market participant gains what they need and what they seek in a way which doesn't harm anybody and which is fruitful for everybody. And therefore, I always think of the finance as when we talk about transactions, right? Transactions are not just financial exchanges. Transactions are social interactions. Markets are not financial markets alone. They are social markets. And the greatest testimony to that is the Silk Roads. The Silk Roads imported and exported culture across the entire path, right? So exchanges or interactions are social interactions. And Islam understands this, and Islam sees this contract and transaction as an exchange of culture, as a social exchange. And therefore, when that's the case, Islam has principles around how this transaction, how this exchange should be managed and governed. It shouldn't be that a transaction leads to a friction, a break in society, because it can do that. And that's why we have so many principles outlining how to do certain things in the economy. And so the key principles of Islamic finance, if we talk about key principles, one of the key principles underpinning Islamic finance, which is really addressing the blood of the economy, money, right? The principle of Islamic finance is money is only a medium of exchange. That's like the core philosophy. If somebody was to ask me, could you summarize Islamic finance in one sentence? I would potentially say this is it. Money is only a medium of exchange, because that changes the entire dynamics of everything you do. Money is never a commodity. It's never priced with its own self. You can't price money with itself. And that's why interest is prohibited. It's the blood of the economy. Number two, anything which is harmful from an Islamic point of view, it's, you can't invest, you can't transact, you can't benefit from. So anything which harms socially, societally, morally, personally, mentally, spiritually, you can't invest in those things. That's why we know you can't invest in gambling, casinos, in conventional financial services, tobacco industry, alcohol. These have real ramifications, impact upon the society. And we know this from the data that we see. Loans, number three. The third principle is loans are gestures of goodwill. Loans are not commercial profit-seeking contracts. You can't commercialize a loan to make it a profit-seeking venture. Loans are purely gestures of goodwill to help one another. So if somebody needs help, you can assist them with a loan, but you can't profit from that. That's another key principle of Islamic finance. Number four, high leverage and taking on unmanageable debts is again discouraged and disliked altogether. And number five, Islam understands that people will want to have exposure through equity, and at times they'll want to take debt financing, and both are permitted, because these things Islam has not regulated that you have to only do equity, because these are things to do with economics. Economics varies due to market conditions, and so Islam has made it really flexible in the sense that at times you'll need equity financing, at times you'll need debt financing. Both are permitted given their specific conditions, right? When we understand these key principles, then the question arises, what is prohibited? Because that's the kind of underlying philosophy. And we know Islam has prohibited riba, which is interest, at the core. Any gain made from a loan is prohibited. So that's why conventional finance, there's all these objections from an Islamic finance perspective on conventional finance, because the key instrument is lending, it's debt financing, and it's interest being charged. And so from an Islamic perspective, that is not Sharia compliant. And that's why Islamic finance now seeks to develop an alternative way of financing, which fits within its worldview and with its objectives. Likewise, number 2, gambling. Gambling is also prohibited. Why? Because it's gaining at the expense and loss of others. Number 3, ambiguity and ignorance is also prohibited. So you can't have ambiguous contracts or things which are unclear and not transparent, because this leads to a friction between people and transacting parties. So Islam is there. If you look at all these principles, Islam is really understanding financial transactions to be intertwined with society. Financial transactions have a real impact on the society. When transactions are done in a manner where there's ambiguity, where one party has, is enriching themselves at the expense of another, it's, unjustly winning at the expense of another. This creates friction in the society and community. And if you look at case studies today, just 2 case studies come to mind. One is the global financial crisis, right, which was over now a decade ago. We know how that unfolded. So you had, at the heart of it were non-Sharia compliant instruments. You had, your mortgage-backed securities, which was the selling of these subprime debts. From a Sharia perspective, you can't keep selling debt. It's not something that can be recycled. And what was happening was you had this one poor loan subprime, mortgager who was, upstream, and his monthly payments was servicing everybody downstream, because this debt was packaged and sold over and over again. Not only that, you had something called CDOs, right, which were collateralized debt obligations. And these were just like all different types of products put together, packaged and sold on. And from a Sharia perspective, that's also not permissible, because you have, gharar in there, uncertainty, you have, a form of gambling, you have debt trading, possession. So the global financial crisis at the heart of it, it had instruments which were not Sharia compliant. What we're seeing today, as the host mentioned, we're seeing this GameStop stock, right? What we're seeing now is the battle between the wolves of Wall Street and the sheep of what I call No Street, right? So you have the common folk and you have the wolves, right, battling one another. It's CFI versus DeFi, centralized versus decentralized finance. It's crazy. I mean, just today, if you look at the news, 38 million call options have been traded today. 38 million call options have been traded. That's the most ever in history. So what's happening is these instruments are being used as weapons, right, to fight back at one another. So what's happening is the financial markets are being vigilante markets, right? It's just, free for all. It's a bloodbath. But this is exactly what Islamic finance stops and prevents. You can't short stock in Islamic finance. Shorting is not permissible. Likewise, buying and trading options is not permissible, right, on the financial market. Speculating with options is not permissible. So the very heart, and you could say the very weapons are being used today in the financial markets. Those things are not permissible in Islamic finance. Islamic finance seeks to prevent that. Financial markets are there to create, transactions of value, to exchange people's needs. It's not there to be a battleground. And that's the core of Islamic finance. It's there to add value in people's lives through the transactions. And that's why what we're seeing today would never be permitted from an Islamic finance perspective. So from an Islamic finance perspective, how do we then fulfill our needs? It's very easy. If you need something, or you have an excess of something, you can buy, you can sell. If you want to make profit, you have an asset, sell that, make a profit. You want cash, right? Sell the asset. You can trade. If you can't afford something, you can lease it. You don't have to buy the asset. If you need somebody's services, hire. Right? So leasing is another contract. If you have credit risk and you want to mitigate, by all means, take guarantors, take securities. It's fine. If you want capital gain, dividend income, invest. No problem, as long as it's Sharia compliant. You need financing, equity financing is available, debt financing is also available. So Islamic finance gives us a set of contracts to fulfill our daily needs. And all these contracts are designed in a way which will save us from eating one another's wealth, consuming one another's wealth through impermissible means like riba and gambling and so on and so forth. Right? And just to finish off with, The title of this presentation today is The Future of Islamic Finance. What do I see as the future? For me, the future is all about fintech, really, what I'm seeing. It's this enabling of financial services for one and all. It's this disaggregation of conventional finance. You're seeing entrepreneurship, you're seeing innovation, creativity, huge potential from youngsters, honestly, from the youth, right? From the millennials coming forward and really developing some amazing ideas. So we're seeing more options, we're seeing choice, we're seeing transparency, we're seeing cost efficiency, a better variety. All of that is creating lower barriers of entry, right? So you're seeing now many different participants coming forward and engaging in financial products, investing and accessing different products. So for me, the future of Islamic finance belongs to the young, the bold, the brave entrepreneurs, like we have today. Areeb is one of them, definitely, who want to make a social impact and create social mobility. And with that, I end. And thank you very much. I hope it was of benefit to all. I look forward to listening to the other panel members. Jazakallah khair.
Jazakallah khair, Mufti Faraz, for delivering some really clear and insightful learnings for us all. Our next speaker this evening will be Shakeel Adil. Shakeel is the partner and global head of Islamic Finance at Smes, advising his extensive portfolio of clients on Sharia-compliant financial arrangements and transactions, and has had experience of that in both the UK and the Middle East across a variety of sectors. It therefore makes Shakeel the ideal speaker to share his experiences on Islamic finance in the legal and corporate world. Thank you and welcome to Shakeel.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you ever so much for that introduction, Salena. I hope and pray everyone is well on this call. Firstly, my thanks to the EY Muslim community for collaborating with the CMS Muslim Network in launching this event. I certainly, when this email came across my desk earlier on in January to say whether I'd like to participate in this, I kind of gladly took up the opportunity. I always like to speak about Islamic finance. It's an area I'm passionate about. I hadn't, in all seriousness, expected it to be as viral as it has been. I think my LinkedIn in particular has been, I think it increased by about 600%. So I won't take that as a reflection of me as an individual, but I think what it demonstrates is that there's a huge appetite and interest for Islamic finance globally, and I'm really honoured to be on the panel together with Mufti Faraz and Areeb, and it's a shame Samina can't join us. So what I want you to do is take around about 15 minutes just to take you through some of my insights of Islamic finance as I see it globally, and maybe hopefully contextualize some of the very powerful and pertinent statements that Mufti Faraz has said. So in terms of my own personal journey, I started working in law firms in 2004, which I'm conscious will be probably when lots of the people on this webinar would have been very young themselves, and I'm probably slightly older than you. And I've now been working in law firms for 17 years. And in that time, when I started off in 2004, I was aware of Islamic finance, but Islamic finance was seen to be incredibly niche, something exotic, something that very few people were aware of. And if I now compare it to the position I find myself in on the 28th of January 2021, the situation is exponentially different. And so I just wanted to take you through quickly these 3 or 4 images on the slide. So the first is I've just explained the 28th of January and the fact we are where we are. I'm also going to touch on the legal world as I see it, and the banking world as I see it, which is by those 2 images. And then hopefully, inshallah, I'm going to talk about some green shoots and where I see the future. So I'm happy for the slide to be removed, and then I'll just carry on with my own kind of presentation. So, as I said, I started working in law firms in 2004. The situation now is fundamentally different to the position it was in when I started in law firms. My current role is that I head up, as Selena said, I head up the global Islamic finance practice at CMS. And that's very much an opportunity of a firm that I joined as a greenfield site. And I've been able to grow my own practice to be a global practice. And as I'm going through, I'll try to give examples of real world transactions that I'm working on. But what I'd like to do at the start, and it's very pertinent that Mufti Faraz was talking about what was going on in the States and the challenges with the kind of almost the adversarial nature of finance in some parts. I want to start with three names. Those names are Apple, Tesla, and Facebook. Now, you might be wondering why on a presentation about Islamic finance in the legal and corporate world, I'm talking about three very large corporates. And the reason for that is that the market capitalizations of Apple, Tesla, and Facebook in aggregate are greater than the entirety of Islamic finance globally. So Islamic finance globally is an industry worth $2.4 trillion, there or thereabouts. In 2003, it was worth 300 billion, sorry. So whilst the growth has been exponential, we do need to contextualize that the world of Islamic finance is very much at its early days. And so it's incumbent upon all of us to help encourage the industry to progress. And that comes not only from scholars like Mufti Faraz or entrepreneurs like Areeb, but from each one of us on this call to help in our own little ways of pushing the industry forward. So I've kind of set the scene of where we are now, and I'll go on then now to talk about the legal and commercial world. I often find when I speak with clients in particular and people interested in Islamic finance, there are a whole host of misconceptions about Islamic finance. In the same way as the word Sharia is seen to be a negative word, the word fatwa is seen to be a negative word. When you speak about the legal position with respect to Islamic finance, what often is said is, well, Islamic finance is just conventional finance, just with a name change. So instead of labeling it interest, you label it profit. And I think that as a point or as an argument is not sustainable. And I'll explain why it's not sustainable. So from a legal perspective, when I document, for example, an English law Sharia compliant transaction, that's a transaction that has to accord with English law principles. That is not a question of changing interest to principal or profit. Mufti Faraz alluded to two concepts which I wanted to pick on. One is gharar, being uncertainty, and the other one, which I think I'll mention, is duress. Now, what often happens in Islamic finance is people get scared. They get scared of words and terminology that they're not aware of. And the unfortunate reality, or the reality, is that those words are not scary words. Those words have English language counterparts, and they are, generally speaking, easy to understand. So if Mufti Faraz refers to gharar and I refer to uncertainty, those are the same, that's exactly the same word. If Mufti Faraz was to talk about the situation where in a Sharia compliant transaction, both contractual counterparties need to be of an even bargaining power, or the commercial bargain needs to be entered into freely and fairly, then as a matter of English law, we have an English law concept of duress. So these are not unknown concepts. We are not starting anew. We are not creating something from scratch. What we're doing is building upon the existing foundations in order to create what we perceive to be a better financial system. Now, if we look, subhanAllah, the Prophet ﷺ's example, what was it that he was doing prior to his revelation? He was a tradesperson. He was traveling in caravans to Palestine, amongst other places, and selling goods. Very much within the spirit of Islamic finance, taking goods, selling them, and making profit. So there is this belief, a misconception, I hasten to add, that in Islam you can't make money. That couldn't be further from the truth. Of course you can make money. Money is there to encourage people to invest. Money is there to provide for material support. It's not a be and end all, but it is incredibly important to understand that in Islamic finance, money is not a bad thing. You can make profit as long as you are taking sufficient risk. The second thing that I always find really interesting when people talk about, oh, just a change in nomenclature, is they fail to appreciate that that change from interest to profit the way to actually allow for that to be legally permissible means a whole host of legislation needs to change or be enacted. And I'll give you some examples. So the first piece of legislation which came out in the UK in the early 2000s to allow for Sharia compliant finance has been built upon and built upon and built upon multiple times, such that in a country like the UK can issue a sovereign sukuk. That UK sovereign sukuk is not labelled as sukuk under the legislation. It's labelled as an alternative finance instrument. And that, in my view, is the way that it should be done. What we're not doing is looking to impose one's views on anyone else. You are simply providing an alternative option if people so choose. And what we can all hope for is that that breadth of choice continues to grow. One other key legal consideration that needs to be borne in mind here is that, in my view, in my humble view, there are three key components to any Sharia compliant transaction. And those are the Sharia, those are legal, and those are commercial. Alhamdulillah, in this talk, I'm speaking about the legal and commercial, and Mufti Faraz has spoken about the Sharia. But when you look at the legal there, the simple fact of the matter is that if a transaction is not legal, very, very, very few people will carry out that transaction, whether it's Sharia compliant or not. And to be clear, that is something that is very much permissible within Islam. In Islam, you are meant to abide by the laws of the land in which you find yourself. So in the UK, I'll use a simple example. In the UK, in order to drive a car or drive a car on the road, you need to have motor insurance. The unfortunate reality in the UK is that there is no, or the situation in the UK is that there are no Sharia compliant motor insurance providers. So does that mean that no Muslim can drive a car in the UK? Of course not. What it means is that one needs to look at the Sharia and apply it to the situation within which you find yourself. So there is an element of necessity which allows people then to drive their cars. And that's exactly the same with broader Islamic finance. And so I'll come on now to talking more about commercial and more about kind of real world examples of the sorts of transactions that I see on a day-to-day basis. Now, a good friend of mine, Omar Sheikh, with the UK Islamic Finance Council, and I'm plagiarizing what he says here, has a very succinct way of describing Islamic finance, and that's as a horizontal niche. And I personally have not found a better phraseology for Islamic finance than a horizontal niche. So when I was alluding to before that we are on the same platform and the same base, what Islamic finance is looking to do is give that same breadth of choice for Muslims and non-Muslims alike in order to avoid prohibitions within the Sharia. And what that then means is that within Islamic finance, you can structure transactions to really do almost everything that you can do in a conventional situation, but in a Sharia compliant manner. And I would really put that Islamic finance or the global Islamic finance industry into three main baskets. The first is, and this is probably from smallest to largest, the first is insurance or decouple. The second is equity, so musharaka type products, which is primarily documented by way of funds. And the third is banking. Now, banking is really split into what I would call debt capital markets, and then also pure banking and finance, so things like project finance, trade finance, real estate finance, corporate lending, and so on. Now, each one of those products can be structured and offered in a Sharia compliant manner. People's views as to Sharia compliance will vary as to how Sharia compliant something is or is not. But the reality within Islamic finance is that a scholar can issue a fatwa, and that fatwa will be binding. Whether someone believes the fatwa or not is irrespective. The fatwa has been issued. So to take you through some examples of the sorts of work that I've been involved in, and again, just to give a flavour of the types of commercial considerations that go on globally, and some of this ties into legal work as well. I assisted, for example, the Capital Markets Authority in Oman on implementing decouple and also sukuk in Oman. With respect to equity, I've worked on funds investing, for example, into US real estate. I'm currently working on a Sharia compliant fund structure in the UK, and I've worked on structures also in Asia Pacific. And banking, which is really my bread and butter, I do anything and everything within that space. Whether that's a financing for Emirates of some some aircraft, or whether that's a ship financing, or whether that's real estate, there is an ability within the global Islamic finance world to structure transactions in a Sharia compliant manner and in a competitive manner. And I think that's a useful segue then to talk about pure numbers. The simple reality is that, and I'm not meaning to put words into Areeb's mouth here, and I'm sure he'll pick up on it. But the simple fact of the matter is, if you have a Sharia compliant product and you have a conventional product, if the Sharia compliant product is more expensive, it's highly unlikely to be attractive. And we are talking very, very, very small percentages. Some of you may be aware that there have been a number of Sharia compliant banks in the UK offering home finance. A number of those have pulled out. And the reason they pulled out is often they don't have the economies of scale to compete against a conventional financier. So most people, or a lot of Muslims and non-Muslims would say, well, actually, I'm just going to go on the basis of what amount I need to pay. And actually, those products will give me the same return or same offer in terms of the financing they'll provide me, but actually this is more expensive. So the key thing for Islamic finance is to have products which are competitive. But furthermore, to have products that distinguish themselves because there's something that is offered in the Islamic product which is not offered in the conventional product. And that does not need to be purely commercial. That can be customer service, that can be ability to transact without going and seeing someone in person, whatever it may be. So one has to look holistically at Islamic finance and understand that commercial is incredibly important. And I would say, unless you have a commercially viable product, you're not going to succeed, because it may be legally perfect, it may be Sharia, a really, really good product, but is it actually going to work? And to use a real world example, for one of my clients, we documented their first Sharia compliant real estate financing, and we were acting for the bank. And the bank had the suite of documents prepared by another law firm. And it was only when those documents were tested in the market and they did their first transaction did they then discover that actually it's all fine and well that this works from a legal perspective, it works from a Sharia perspective, but it doesn't work from a commercial perspective. And so the key thing there is that this is a triumvirate of factors which all need to gel together. Now, for those, and I know Areeb, I know that there's a number of people from the Big Four on this webinar, so they probably like this. So accountants often just seem to be, tax people, which again is a bit like lawyers just doing law. Probably it's kind of couldn't really be further from the truth. So the reason I say that is that actually what often people forget is tax is incredibly important as part of commercial considerations. So you may have a really, a brilliant Sharia product. It may work commercially, it may work legally, but if you have massive withholding tax, that product's not going to fly. So the reason I say all of this is that these considerations, the legal considerations, the commercial considerations, the tax considerations, those are identical, whether this is a Sharia compliant product or whether this is a conventional product. What we're adding on to that mix is the Sharia. And alhamdulillah, we are blessed with a system and a way of life that allows us to be innovative. It allows us to be creative. It allows us to use one's own minds to be able to determine whether something is or is not permissible. So this sense of the Sharia being somehow parochial or regimented is an anathema when you actually look at the Sharia. When you look at what scholars are determining and why they are determining this and why there is an ability to consider a product and determine it to be Sharia compliant. So if I may then, that's kind of talking then about the legal and the commercial, and I'd like to then kind of take the last 5 minutes of this presentation to talk about the future. So you may recall on my slides I talked about where we are now, legal and commercial, and now kind of the green shoots. My personal view is that Islamic finance is still incredibly nascent. We are dealing with an industry which has really, in its modern guise, only been around since for the past 40 years or so. Bear in mind that that's comparing against a conventional financial system which is based on essentially ultimately the papacy going back over 1,000 years. So we are incredibly young as an industry. There's a huge amount to do, but we have to credit ourselves with the growth that we've experienced and not rest on our laurels in order to be able to grow further. So a few things that I would see in terms of themes that will help the industry continue to grow. And you will find it no surprise that I will start with legal issues. And really that's split into, in my view, into standardization and innovation. And those two terms are not opposites of one another or contentious with one another. So from a banking perspective, we have what's known as the LMA, the Loan Market Association. That's the global standard for finance for loan agreements. If I structure a transaction on a Sharia compliant basis, it will follow LMA market norms. So standardization is positive. It means that people know what they're doing. Why is it that people like to go to certain fast food restaurants? Because wherever you go globally, if you go to a McDonald's in the UK, or you go to a McDonald's in Dubai, or you go to a McDonald's in Malaysia, and I'm not necessarily saying, that McDonald's is the chosen restaurant. You may go wherever you wish. If you go to any one of those restaurants, you know that the food will be the same. So there's nothing wrong with standardization. But alongside that, there has to be innovation. There has to be an ability to work within parameters to allow yourselves to grow. And we've obviously got Areeb again and many others, fintech pioneers, looking to push those boundaries in a Sharia compliant manner and provide consumers ultimately with products that they want to use. And to give you some of those innovation, again, from a legal perspective, you have laws being changed almost on a weekly basis across the globe to facilitate Islamic finance. The next major growth I would see actually relates to product offering. And as part of that, the increasing connection, and I'm sure there's a number of people in the audience who will be familiar with these principles, but in particular ethical finance and the sustainable development goals. So when we look at what our obligations are as Muslims and our beliefs as Muslims, then we are custodians of this planet. We are not owners of this planet. It's incumbent upon us to ensure that we leave this planet in a better position than we found it. And I think most people would struggle to think that that's actually the case because things like climate change and so on are real. And so for us, it's incredibly important to see how that synergy applies and to try to build upon the connections, in particular with ethical finance and the SDGs, to put forward an offering which is attractive to many people. Finally, I'd like to end on what I see as particular challenges. One of those challenges I think will be addressed by most, if not all, of the participants on this webinar, and that's human capital. That is that we need people who are knowledgeable, who understand Western finance and understand Islamic finance to be able to push the industry forward. What we also need, and which is a significant, in my view, a significant challenge at the moment, is greater use of Islamic finance at a sovereign level. When you look, for example, in the UK government will issue gilts, and as will many other governments around the world, to raise money. The UK as a Western power has only issued one sovereign sukuk. So there needs to be a greater take-up in both non-Muslim countries and Muslim countries of Islamic products. Alongside that, we need to be encouraging sovereign wealth to be investing into Sharia compliant products. So if we look at an organization, for example, like BlackRock has assets under management of $8.6 trillion. I think very few of those assets under management will be Sharia compliant. Organizations like BlackRock and many other corporate institutions around the world will look to progress further into Islamic finance if they see a demand. And a particular demand and a material demand is from sovereign wealth. The third category I would talk about is SMEs. There is a pressing need within Islamic finance to service SMEs. And the ability to provide competitive offering to allow small businesses to grow. And finally, I'd like to end on microfinance. Microfinance is impacting and impactful in a way that I think accords incredibly well with Islamic finance and Sharia principles. but unfortunately, there's just very, very limited take up from a Sharia compliance perspective in terms of bandwidth. And so that, again, if anyone is interested, I think is something that I would actively encourage people to be involved in. So I think that takes me to the end of my 15 minutes. So I'll hand back to Selena.
Jazakallah khair, Shakeel, for speaking so eloquently about some very, very technical matters there. I've most certainly learnt a wealth of knowledge just then. Our final speaker for the evening is Areeb Siddiqui, the founder and CEO of Kestrl, which is an app to help budget, save and invest in line with halal values. Having already heard Areeb speak at one of our previous EY Muslim community events about technology and innovation, we're really pleased to welcome Areeb back to talk to us about the importance of personal finance. Thank you, Areeb.
Okay, great. So bear with me whilst I share my screen. I've actually prepared a few slides, if that's all right with everyone. Okay, cool. So Assalamu alaikum, everyone. My name is Areeb. I'm the founder and the CEO of Kestrl. We're an app that has been available for download on the App Store and Google Play for a few months now, so do please check us out. And we are part of the University of Cambridge and also the CMS accelerator programs, coincidentally. And I also just wanted to say a massive thank you to everyone at the EY Muslim community for helping to set this up, and of course the CMS Muslim network as well for helping to arrange all of the speakers. So thank you so much for your hard work on this. Right, so my topic is around personal finance and the future of that. And I thought the best way of doing that is really to express my journey as a British Muslim experiencing issues with personal finance in the UK, and also to tell you about the story of Kestrl, how it came about to try and solve this problem. So what is Kestrl? So Kestrl is an app that makes it really easy for Muslims to do three things: to budget, to save, and also to invest in line with their personal values. So these three things are very important, and we keep coming back to them time and time again. The reason for that is we believe that the issue which Muslims face is twofold. It's not just about Islamic financial literacy and not knowing where to go in those respects. It's also about a general financial literacy problem, which is non-Muslim specific, but it is a rampant issue within the UK. So we founded Kestrl on this single idea, that no one should ever feel like they have to compromise on their values when it comes to achieving their financial goals. For Muslims, that means their religious values, but for many non-Muslims, it could mean ethical values, including reducing their CO2 emissions from their spending habits, for example. We believe it wasn't right and it wasn't fair that many people are having to do that with their banking, saving and investment choices. And that's what we were trying to tackle. So Kestrl all began with a single question, which was, why don't you use an Islamic bank? Which was a question asked me by my good friend who you can see there in the brown coat, Daing Tirmizi, one lunchtime in between lectures. And he asked me that once when I was paying for lunch and he saw me using a Barclays debit card. And after muttering a few answers about how my parents signed me up for it a long time ago, and how, you know, there's not really a good alternative in the UK, it just suddenly dawned on me that I didn't really know why I wasn't using an Islamic bank. Daing comes from Malaysia, where Islamic banking is very much the norm, whereas in the UK, whereas we tend to be some of the most religious groups of Muslims in the Western world, you know, being most likely to pray 5 times a day, or to observe Ramadan, or to eat halal food. When it comes to our finances, there was almost an intergenerational normalization that it was okay to compromise on our values when it came to reaching financial goals, whether it was looking for a Sharia compliant bank account or looking to take out a mortgage. So that was something that really didn't sit right with us. And we actually spent our summer research project on our MBA that we were studying for, doing a nationwide survey of Muslims' banking habits to understand whether I was alone in experiencing this. And it turns out that that was very much not the case. So we managed to build up a profile of what a typical young Muslim in the UK looked like and the problems that they experience. So meet Ali. He's 25 years old. He's living and working in London, a British Pakistani earning about 35k a year. Let's say, for the sake of this example, that he's an accountant at EY. He's single, and most importantly for this, he is a practicing Muslim. He knows exactly what he wants out of life. He wants to save up for a house and to move out. He wants to save up for a car, a wedding, and one day to retire. But all the other questions are very difficult for Ali to answer. How he's going to get there is one of the biggest problems. He manages to save an amount of his salary every year, but he keeps it in a current account. Not, he doesn't want to go for any kind of interest generating savings account. And all of the Islamic savings accounts that he has are either he doesn't know about them, or they're too digitally unfriendly and inconvenient for him to use. So he doesn't go for the Islamic option. Similarly, when he's going to achieve those goals is very difficult for him to know and to plan for, as he's not very diligent with his spending or his budgeting behavior. And the biggest problem Ali experiences by far is where. There is a severe lack of awareness amongst the British Muslim community of the Islamic financial options that do exist for them right now in the community. So that was the problem that we were trying to solve, and really Kestrl tries to solve that in three main ways. So number one was how. So we do that with our open banking enabled budgeting tool, which we'll show you a sneak peek of later and is currently available for download on the App Store and Google Play. So using an amazing regulation in the UK called open banking, we can actually plug in multiple bank accounts into Kestrl, view your transactions in a single place, and create a bespoke budget based on your personal spending habits and your income to help you take your salary and to save as much of it as possible every single month and to do things with it. In terms of the when, we are looking to tackle this with our savings features, which we call the Kestrl eggs. So this is essentially helping you to save for your goals along a specific timeline, both short-term and long-term. And we save those monies that money into ring-fenced accounts or savings pots, which are associated with those goals, whether it's saving for a house in 5 years' time, a car in 2 years' time, a wedding in 1 year time. So you can make regular deposits from your Monzo, your Barclays account, moving them into those savings pots. And finally, the where. So this was, again, the biggest problem we found Muslims were experiencing was they didn't actually know where to turn to when it came to Sharia compliant investment or savings products. They'd heard of one or two big names, but had been put off by them for a variety of reasons, when in reality, there are many good options there. So we are creating a Sharia compliant marketplace of all of the Sharia options which are available in the UK, which you can view, compare, and purchase directly through the application. So at this point, I wanted to talk about the personal finance journey and some of the financial literacy issues that people were experiencing. And really at Kestrl, we break this down into 4 steps. And it's not rocket science, it's something which many people have talked about in the past, but these are typically the 4 steps people should be doing, but are not necessarily doing. And it's in this order. Most people are really interested in the green and the blue option, the options 3 and 4, but options 1 and 2, whilst being a little bit more boring, are really, really paramount to getting right before you look at saving or investing. So budgeting essentially, on the face of it, means that you have more money coming in than you have going out, but it means a number of other things as well. It means really understanding what your essential spending is. What do you have to spend every month? And of those things that you're spending, are they the cheapest options available or the best options for you? So that could be switching to a cheaper energy provider, mobile phone provider, internet provider, what have you. And making sure you're really staying on top of, okay, how much can I actually spend and how can I maximize my income every single month? It's something which is really important and seems really easy, but a lot of people do not take it into consideration, unfortunately. Step 2 is equally important, emergencies and priorities. So getting your priorities straight, whether it's making a timeline of your goals, what you want to achieve in the short term, which at Kestrl we define as really things within the next 5 years. So that could be putting down a deposit for a house, for example, or saving for a car, and longer term priorities, which tend to be generally for people 2 things, saving up for a pension, retirement in some way, or for their children, sending them to school or education or to leave them something. So setting those things is really important for the next steps, as well as making sure that before you're considering investing or saving, that especially as a Muslim, that you don't have any debts that you may need to be paying off, because it's really, really important that you're paying those off and you're not letting those accrue over time and compound. So we generally say that you should save for short-term goals. And what that means is really trying to, instead of just keeping your money in a current account, like the majority of Muslims we found were doing, finding a Sharia compliant savings account, which is generating a return. The return isn't brilliant, as they're not for many banks, but at the very least that you are beating inflation. Inflation is the purchasing power reducing of actual currency over time. Generally, it's been 2 to 2.5% each year, but right now it's about 0.6. But the point is that if you keep your money in a current account or even under the mattress, the value of it is being eroded away. So you're much better putting it in a savings account, which generates a halal return in the short term. We say for the short term because if it's within the next 5 years and you need to get a hold of that money, you can quickly withdraw it depending on the term of the savings account. We say investing for the long term because generally, if you're looking to invest, and again, this isn't investment advice in any way, shape or form, you really need to be doing it for long-term goals. Because in the short term, you could recognize losses, you can lose more money than you make. But in the long term, certainly for passive funds, if you're going for any kind of index fund that tracks a market like the FTSE 100, you are much more likely to make a gain. Whereas in the short term, it can fluctuate significantly. So these are the 4 steps that at Kestrl we've really recognized, and we're trying to build solutions around in all of them. So what I'd love to do at this point, if I still have time, which it looks like I do, I'd love to show you a quick demonstration of what Kestrl looks like and what we can actually do for you, and also some of the technology and regulations that we're doing. I used to just share my screen for the app, which is on my phone, but I realized that everyone could see my bank balances and exactly how much I'm spending. So this is a demo and a dummy account of what that looks like. So when you download Kestrl for the first time, you'll see this interface and it will tell you exactly what we're trying to do. We're trying to help you to budget, to save for your goals with our Kestrl eggs, and to invest for the future with a number of our partners here, which are listed on the marketplace right now. In terms of sign up, it's really quick and easy. There's 4 simple steps which you'll need to do: a mobile phone, a code to make sure we know it's you, setting a passcode, and then you're essentially in. Now, we leverage something that I talked about already, which in the UK is an amazing permission called open banking. Now, open banking really allows you to connect multiple bank accounts in a read-only fashion with a third party. So with that, we can actually see your bank balances and your transactions and what's going on there, all accumulated in one place. And I stress that this is read-only, so no one can actually move the money in any way. It's really a way of giving the power back to the people and making sure that they know what is happening with their banking information, and they can choose who can and who can't view that data. And really what we're doing is this: we're creating a personal balance sheet for people. So at the top, we have your monthly income. We tell you what's left safe to spend for you this month within your budget. And of your income, there's 3 simple lines. Your essential spending, so the things that you have to spend on this month, whether it's your vital bills and commitments, family expenditures, home purchases, etc. So we'll ring fence that money for you based on your monthly spending each month in this area. Your non-essential spending, so these are anything from Netflix to eating out, takeaways, anything which you can go without. So Netflix is not an essential spending, as many of our users are loath to admit, but it should really be going in that bucket. And finally, this is the key part. We want to be taking your income and growing the savings part as much as possible, maximizing that so you can use it for other things. So that's what Kestrl is, and then we have this dynamic news feed where is really the most important things about your money at the moment, from how much money you have left to spend, what's unallocated, upcoming bills, etc. And then we have placeholders for these future products, including our Kestrl eggs, upcoming, and our marketplace. So, this is really just some of what we've been doing at Kestrl, and we're one of many of the fintechs which have been taking advantage of the amazing regulations and the frankly very innovative regulator in the UK, which has allowed the UK to really become one of the capitals for Islamic Fintech and Islamic Finance in the world, really rivaling the powerhouses of Malaysia and the UAE in this respect. I believe there's 27 of us now. So to finish off my talk, and that just really sums up the personal finance journey. I just wanted to talk a little bit about our insights and the future into Islamic finance, as well as the overlap a little bit with ethical finance. So the 2 key insights that we found from our users is that, number 1, Muslims are not using Islamic solutions, surprise, surprise, primarily due to lack of awareness of what that is. Of what's actually out there. So we thought it would be due to lack of trust or to higher fees, but in reality, it was lack of awareness of what actually existed there. But secondly, and a really important finding, was that younger Muslims care far more that their money is doing good in the world around them, as opposed to simply ticking a Sharia box or a no interest box, which meant that younger millennials and Gen Zs cared as much that about the environment and about ethical initiatives, which both Brother Shakeel and Mufti Faraz hinted at as well in their talks too. So that sort of wraps up what I wanted to talk about with Kestrl. So if you liked what you saw, please do check us out, as well as any of the other brands there. And please do get in touch either through the Q&A or after this. But yeah, thank you very much.
Jazakallah khair, Areeb, and a huge thank you to all of our speakers for talking so passionately about the areas that you each have insight on. There's been quite a lot of questions which have been coming through the chat, and we've been keeping an eye on those. So we'll start by putting a question through to you, Mufti Faraz, please. The first question for you is, how do you decouple interest from inflation? If you loan someone money over a 10 to 20 year period, shouldn't you get back the same amount in real terms? And I'll hand that over to you.
Sure. So, I mean, for Sharia does recognize time value of money and inflation, no doubt about it. And what we do in Islamic finance is then use the ijara contract, leasing, to kind of index accordingly. But the reason why inflation is not recognized in lending and loan contracts is because of the prophetic narration itself. That in and of itself, it cancels out giving back due on inflation. So it shouldn't be that. The prophetic hadith clearly stipulates that when you lend or when you exchange money, it should be for unit, not in terms of value. And so it's against what we call it's khilaf al-qiyas, which means it's because this hadith is there, this prophetic narration, it's going away from the norms that we know, and it's stipulating a very clear principle that this you cannot do. It'll fall under riba and interest. That's why it's not permitted. But yeah, what we do then in Islamic finance, we recognize time value of money. It's a concept. We use different contracts. The rental contract is so favorable in Islamic home purchase plans. They use a rental and diminishing musharaka. Well, that's one of the reasons why lease contract is used, is to address this particular issue, amongst many other reasons as well. So, I mean, long story short, it's because of the hadith it's not recognized.
Great, thank you so much for that. The next question I'm going to put to you, Shakeel. A question we've got for you is, can you elaborate on how to become an Islamic finance lawyer? As most lawyers who are Islamic finance lawyers have practical conventional finance. As a junior lawyer, you probably might be doing prohibited work in the beginning for a number of years before you can be specialized as an Islamic finance lawyer. How do you get around this?
Thank you very much for that, Selena. Thanks to the person who asked that question. I think the issue that's been raised there is incredibly important, and I would say ultimately it's a question of one's own personal faith and the reasons why they're doing what they're doing. In my view, it would be incredibly hard to be a lawyer specializing in Islamic finance if you do not know conventional finance. And there's a number of reasons for that. One is the market standard documentation is conventional finance based. And the other really important reason is that most, if not a very large number of the people that you deal with in Islamic finance come from a conventional financial background. And I think what's really, really, really important to bear in mind for the audience is that Islamic finance is not only for Muslims. Islamic finance is for non-Muslims, it's for Muslims, it's for people with faith and people with no faith. And the reason I say that, and the reason why I place emphasis on it, is that you need to be able to explain principles in a way that accords with English law, that accords with the Sharia, but in a way that keeps it open. And the reason I say that with respect to, for example, my own journey, is that there were times in my career where I was probably spending 60 to 70% of my time doing conventional finance, whereas now I spend 90 to 95% of my time doing Sharia compliant finance. But what that doesn't mean is that I don't still work on conventional financial transactions. I think you need to, in order to stay abreast of what's going on in the market. Fundamentally, your clients, and so the job of a lawyer, and certainly an English qualified lawyer, is to act in their client's best interests. Professionally, you need to know what is in your client's best interests. And if you do not know what's in your client's best interests, you should not be a lawyer. And I'll give you a very, very simple example. If I was to mention the phrase PIK, if someone was to say to you, is PIK permissible? In Islamic finance, you will not come across the concept of PIK. So unless you've got a base in conventional finance, you will not know what PIK is. And I've had this question asked to me, is PIK permissible? Well, if I don't know what PIK is, I can't answer that question, and therefore I can't act in my client's best interests. PIK, for everyone's information, or for those that aren't aware, is payment in kind, essentially amortization. Oh, sorry, capitalization, apologies. So from a Sharia perspective, that's not permissible, but you need to be able to answer that question. So for me personally, my journey has been that, yes, I've worked on conventional financing, but could I be a partner in the head of Islamic finance at CMS now working across, we've got offices in more than 70 offices globally in over 50 countries, and I head up that entire practice. So do I need to know conventional finance? Yes. Have I practiced Islamic conventional finance? Yes. Did I feel reticent at times? Yes. But did I know why I was doing it and what my ultimate aim was? Yes. So ultimately, I think this comes down to a personal choice. And if you feel able and you understand why you're doing it, then I think it's a commercial bargain that you need to strike with yourself.
Thank you for that, Shakeel. Really interesting points that you put forward there. Areeb, I'm going to come to you with a question now, which has been voted quite highly for an answer. What's stopping Islamic fintechs like Kestrl from becoming huge? What does it take to become the next Revolut?
There's a few ways of answering that question. Number one is major backing. So many of the fintechs require a large capital requirements to get up and running in the future. Alhamdulillah, we've been okay. We've got an investment from a few quite senior and well-known people in the Islamic finance industry, and we are alhamdulillah quite a successful crowdfunding campaign as well to get up and running. But inshallah, I hope we can become quite big and quite well known amongst the Muslim community. Our ambition has never been about size and valuation and all of that. It's really just been about helping people. So helping the young Muslims who specifically really require it. We built Kestrel first and foremost for ourselves and for people like us. And that's really what we want to stay true to. So we're not really about trying to become a mega unicorn or anything like that. If that happens, then, if there are any shareholders listening, I'm not saying that could not happen. But inshallah, I think it's about capital, and I just really think that we are looking to the trailblazers in the space, specifically a shout out to the fintechs like Yielders, the property crowdfunding platform, and Wahid Invest, who are probably the titans within this space at the moment and have really blazed an amazing trail for us to follow, and have done amazing things in fundraising and also reaching revenue and going well on their way to profitability. So I think it is an early space, and inshallah we'll get there. It's just about looking at success stories and getting more people in the market comfortable with what we're doing, inshallah. So I think, yeah, that's the main barrier, and hopefully you can see a few big names coming up soon.
Thank you, Areeb. Mufti Faraz, we're going to put another question through to you. It's a bit of a technical one. Is trading cryptocurrency a Sharia compliant method or mechanism of creating income?
Yeah, this is a tricky one. I don't want to say much on this, but well, all I can say is there's a spectrum of views among scholars right now, right? So there's literally 4 views in the industry. One view is it's completely prohibited. The other view on the other side of the spectrum, it's permissible, right? And in fact, some scholars even view cryptocurrencies as a form of currency within the specific networks, or a form of payment within specific networks only, not on the same level as fiat currencies. Personally, where do I sit on that? I fall more towards the permissible side, However, there has to be Sharia screening. You have to know what you're investing. It shouldn't be just like free for all, as a trigger happy investing. And therefore, you need to do your research. I've written a number of research papers on cryptocurrencies, which have been published by Sharia Review Bureau in Bahrain. So anybody who just Googles my name and puts cryptocurrencies, you'll find a number of research papers. I've also authored a book called Introduction to Islamic Fintech. In there, I have an entire chapter dedicated to cryptocurrency. So these are things that I would recommend you to read. But ultimately, it's your own decision. One is a Sharia issue, but then also the financial risks are involved in the regulations. Please keep that all in mind as well, as a disclaimer for myself.
Jazakallah khair, Mufti Faraz. Shakeel, a question for you, please. You said about fatwas becoming binding just because they've been issued by a scholar. How do you address the issue of scholars providing fatwas for monetary gains or having a lack of knowledge, both Islamic and financial?
I kind of was expecting that sort of question to be asked. I think the reality is there is a perception of scholars for hire, shall we say. Scholars who are chosen because they are on the more liberal end of the spectrum, or that if you pay them a certain amount of money, that they'll agree to what you're saying. From a Sharia perspective, as I understand it, a fatwa issued by a scholar duly empowered, I hasten to add, and we have to be very careful here that we understand what that means. So not every mufti or imam or the person who leads a prayer is empowered to issue a fatwa. There has to be a certain caliber before you can issue a fatwa. But those who do issue fatwas with appropriate accreditation, that's an opinion which is binding. And the reason I say that, and apologies, I should be clearer, that is a valid fatwa. So it cannot be challenged in the sense of saying someone can revoke it. So if I was to give an example, if I was to analogize that and understand, so a fatwa is a jurisprudential ruling. If we analogize that to a court ruling, so a judge issues a ruling, you could have a judge issue a ruling and someone higher up or in a higher court issuing a ruling which challenges that and revokes it. That cannot happen or does not happen in the Sharia. And that is fundamentally important because of the sense of ijtihad and the fact that individuals need to be making their own choices. So if someone issues a fatwa and you know that fatwa or you don't believe that fatwa to have been accurately issued, then that's not something that you can go off and adhere to. So in English law, we have the concept of constructive knowledge. So if you're involved, for example, in a transaction or in your day-to-day life, and you're aware that a scholar has issued a fatwa, but a key piece of information, for example, has been withheld from them, but you're aware that that information would have a material impact on the fatwa, then you can't hold your hands up and say, oh, actually, you know what, I still stick with that fatwa, because you know that there's something missing. So that deals with, I suppose, the question of the validity of the fatwa. The fatwa is valid, and if you read any fatwa, they'll always say it's their view, right? And then it's up to you to determine whether you agree with that view. So using Mufti Faraz's example, if you've got 4 different scholars issuing 4 different opinions, you need to choose which one of those opinions you adhere to. And that's the beauty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala giving human beings the freedom and the choice to be able to determine what they agree with and what they don't agree with. With respect to a lack of knowledge or scholars for hire, I think that is massively overplayed. In the dealings and the transactions I work with, it's incredibly rare to come across a scholar who does not understand conventional finance and is not able to justify why they're saying what they're saying. Alhamdulillah, I'm incredibly blessed to work with some really, really bright scholars, very, very conversant, who not only know about finance and both conventional and Islam, but also know the law. And so you can have a conversation with them, which is a technical conversation, and they understand the parameters within which you find yourself. I think that sense of scholars being for hire, of course, scholars are paid, but then everyone is paid. I mean, the reality is the scholar is there and that's their job. So if you go and see a doctor and you're in the UK and you go to the NHS is paying the doctor. Why, if you went to a scholar, would you not expect the scholar to be paid? That seems somewhat unusual to me. But I think the key thing is that when you are looking at a scholar and using, again, the medical example, if you've got something wrong with your back, you're going to go and see a specialist who deals with backs. You're not going to go and deal with a specialist who, I don't know, deals with the heart, for example. right? So that's the key thing, that if you go to a scholar, you need to know that they have the requisite knowledge in that particular area. So Mufti Faraz, alhamdulillah, knows about fintech. A lot of scholars will not know about fintech. And so are they the right people to go and ask that question to? Most people then turn around and say, well, actually, you know what, I don't know that, but this person does. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you for providing an answer to that, really helpful. Areeb, we've got another question for you, please. Do you think that the UK is the right place for Islamic fintech companies like Kestrel, or do you think that you'd be more successful in a Muslim state such as the UAE or Malaysia?
So that's a really interesting question. There's two reasons why I think the UK is really the right place. Number one is the regulation, and number two, the openness of the Muslim users, retail customers. So firstly, we in the UK, I think it's by virtue of being one of the financial capitals of the world with proximity to London and having a regulator that is genuinely very innovative and cutting edge and willing to push the boundaries. We've had a lot of fintechs coming out of the UK in general. So it's only natural that Islamic fintechs have also been taking advantage of that. Muslim populations, and this is often something which I think many in the Sharia space underestimate, they really vary from country to country culturally in terms of openness to different ideas, and in particular to Islamic finance. UK Muslims, for example, we saw that there is a great desire for Islamic financial solutions. 90% of Muslims interviewed said that they really want it, and they feel bad about having to compromise on their religious values. But very few people are using it, and the reasons that they're not using it are primarily because they don't know what is there, and they are not satisfied with the convenience and the lack of digital solutions out there. However, Germany, for example, where the majority of Muslims that live there are Turkish, as some people have found who've tried to target that population, they have lived for generations, several generations, without a concept of Islamic finance. So when presented with solutions, there really wasn't much uptake for it. With regards to the UAE and the Middle East, it's an interesting one. At Kestrel, we have great ties with Malaysia. My co-founder Dayang is Malaysian, and most of our tech team is based there. And like I said, Islamic finance is really the norm there. However, we'd really need to understand the exact problem that Muslims in Malaysia, for example, are facing. It would be the same for Dubai or the UAE. Whether it's to do with mortgages, it's unlikely to be to do with that. It might be digital convenience. It might be car financing, for example, but it's going to vary from place to place. So really, for us, we think the UK is one of the best places for Islamic fintechs because of the regulation and because of the openness of people to take on these solutions.
Thank you, Areeb. Mufti Faraz, another question for you, please. There's been a lot of heightened discussion around price gouging, for example, around gaming consoles, trainers, and other consumer goods. Some people, or even bots, have been buying up all of the stock and reselling these goods at an inflated price. This might seem as entrepreneurial, but also often immoral in the public eye. What would be the Islamic approach here? Is this similar to day trading, and is day trading halal? For example, buying and selling shares after a short period of time in a volatile market rather than investing for growth?
Sure. So with regards to the first question, this has actually been addressed in the hadith itself. The Prophet himself prohibited practices known as talaqi al-jalab, right, where you have a trader who hoards, he buys everything and waits for the prices to inflate and then on selling to the market in the city or wherever it may be. But the scholars mention that this will only apply where it's causing actual harm. Now, there's a debate whether if this refers to only food stuff or to all items. Many of the scholars feel it refers to everything, not only restricted to food stuff. Anything which is of need or people, buy and sell generally, then to do this with that particular intention, and it causes harm at the same time to the people in the industry, then it'll be discouraged and disliked. However, if it's not causing harm to anybody, then you can hold on to the asset until it, if the price does inflate and sell until then, that's not a problem because you're not harming somebody. That's the key thing here. To the second question on day trading, the majority of the scholars are of the view that you must take possession, ownership of the shares. So you should be the owner of record, which usually happens upon settlement and T+2. And so most scholars are of the view that you shouldn't sell any position that you hold before T+2. That is the most common view across the Islamic finance world at present.
Thank you. Shakeel, a question for you, please. Could you please explain the difference between a normal mortgage and an Islamic finance mortgage? I want to buy a house, but I know interest mortgages are haram, and I'm looking into Islamic finance, but some people are saying that they are the same thing but with different principles. This has been one of the most liked questions that's been put in the chat.
Okay. So again, I think that's a very common statement when you speak with kind of the equivalent of Joe Blogs in the Muslim world or in the non-Muslim world, that there's a perception that actually the product is the same, but just the name has been changed. And again, I'd kind of echo what I said earlier, which is that fundamentally the product is going to be different. You may not necessarily appreciate why the product is different, but the product is different. I can't necessarily speak to specifics because I'm not sure which jurisdiction, for example, this individual or individuals are from, because the legislative regime may very well be different in those jurisdictions than, for example, the UK or the Middle East or wherever. But in principle, the key differences tend to be that in a conventional mortgage, what you're doing is you're going to a bank and you're saying, I want to buy this house. I will put down a 25% deposit or 5% deposit, 40% deposit, whatever it may be, and I'm now going to give you security and I'm going to pay you the money that I've borrowed plus interest. In a Sharia compliant transaction, that generally speaking is not how it works, and it's far more the general rule of thumb is that there would be a shared ownership between the funder and the end kind of the buyer. Now, fundamentally, that is very, very different to what a conventional bank would do. If you went to a conventional bank, take any high street bank, you go to them and you say, okay, what I want you to do is I want, for example, you to own 75% of my house and I own 25% of my house. The bank's going to turn around to you and say, we're a bank, we lend money, we don't own property, and we don't rent property. So that is fundamentally a different product. So this isn't a question of changing the name. Now, it may be that the economic return that you pay to the financier is the same as a conventional product, but it's not the same product. Likewise, if you look at one of the products that's very widely used in Islamic finance is a commodity murabaha or tawarruk. At its simplest, that is using commodities to essentially help synthesize a conventional loan. Lots of people would say, well, that's kind of really skirting the boundaries. But what is actually fundamentally that you're doing? You are buying and selling commodities. Now, to be clear here, the individual financier and the individual customer can choose what they do with those commodities. So one of my clients, which is certainly on the more conservative end of the spectrum, what they do is they say, okay, we're going to sell you these commodities. If you want these commodities, we'll deliver them to you. So if someone decides they want £100,000 worth of copper, they can get £100,000 worth of copper and it can be delivered to them. So this is not a sham. People may think it's a sham, but when you look at the underlying documents, what is it that you're actually trying to do? What is the underlying product? And I think the key thing is to understand what that product is and then to appreciate the differences. Going back then, if I may, just to the house example, in the situation where the bank owns the house and the customer lives in the house, or the customer has 25% and the bank has 75%, Islamically, there are certain items which the bank as the owner needs to be responsible for. For example, insurance and performing major maintenance and repairs. That is not what happens conventionally. If you've got a conventional mortgage, your bank does not take out your insurance for you. Your bank does not pay council tax if the property is empty. These are fundamentally different. They may achieve the same economic gain, they may achieve the same economic result, but they aren't the same. So, it's kind of using a totally tangential example. If you have a Tesla and you have a Ford, they're both cars, but they're both different. So they may achieve the same thing, but it doesn't mean they are the same. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you for answering that so eloquently. Our final question is for Areeb before we hand over to Mudassar to close today's session. So Areeb, how do you screen products before you add them to Kestrel for users? What is the process behind this screening, both financially and Islamically? Thank you.
So that's a really good question. Firstly, in terms of the products that we would onboard onto our marketplace, they need to be Sharia compliant and to have a Sharia certification on their own at the moment. However, we are looking to work with some non-Sharia brands which may actually have Sharia products, which is why we've taken on a Sharia advisor who is actually on the call today, as Mufti Faraz is our Sharia advisor at Kestrl, who will be looking into those contracts and looking to do that, as there are a number of products which are out there in the ethical market, which just by virtue of avoiding certain bad activities, such as alcohol, gambling, they are actually potentially Sharia compliant. So we can offer a wider range there. In terms of the products that we really want to offer, I mean, this is a journey which I started going on when I was trying to sort out my own personal finances, where I realized the money that I had been making whilst working in the city was being eroded over time in my current account, and I wanted to do something about it. So whether that was moving the money into a savings account, which just made sense to try and to offset the inflation. But when it came to investing, it was really about trying to find opportunities that were both low risk and that actually made sense in the long term. And in terms of what we're trying to do with Kestrel, our long-term goal is really we would love to link up our savings pots or the Kestrel eggs with low risk but decent returning funds which exist out there, Sharia funds, that you can just have your money in for your longer term goals, the things that you want to achieve in 10 years plus, and have that growing over a set point in time. And there's an amazing book that people should check out called The Psychology of Money, where they give an amazing example of this, of a man who lived and worked in rural America as a janitor, who but for all intents and purposes, no one thought that he was incredibly wealthy. But when he died in 2014, he was able to leave millions to his children and also his local community. And the way he did that was actually almost entirely by just investing everything that he had onto a passive fund, which has tracked the market, which is an incredible insight into, I think, just how uneducated so many of us are when it comes to our finances and what we should be doing to reach our long-term goals. And that's really where we want to get to Kestrel, to help people to basically make those good financial decisions without compromising on what matters to them. So I hope that answers the question in a roundabout way. Okay.
Thank you very much, Areeb. And I'd like to thank all three of our panelists, Mufti Faraz, Shakeel, Areeb, our brilliant host, Selena. And just to wrap up, we can all see, alhamdulillah, there is so much attraction, there's so much need for Islamic finance in the modern world. And for those of you that are EY, you probably hear me always banging on about this, but this just shows that Islam is not just a religion of praying 5 times a day and giving 2.5% of your charity, giving 2.5% of your wealth to charity. But Islam, it's a manual for life. And the more you go into it, the more you realize that, from every single aspect of your life, from the day you're born to the day, till even after you pass away, Islam is always there. It's got rulings in place. It's got guidance in place. And for us all, what I've personally learned from, this session is how disconnected we might feel with, Islamic finance. For a lot of us who might be, practicing and, might be going to the mosque regularly, do we know about Islamic finance? How much do we know about it? And I guess this event shows the appetite there is within our community. And I personally know I'm going to be more interested in Islamic finance now. I'm going to research more into it, spend more time and resources into it. And that's what I advise everyone on this call to do. There's been lots of questions coming through about how do we make Islamic finance more mainstream? How can we ensure Muslims are supporting Islamic finance? And it's literally from events like this, it's literally learning from one another, supporting one another. And those are all fundamental Islamic principles. Learning knowledge, it's key to Islam. Supporting your brother in faith, it's key to Islam. And as a final roundup, I'd really, really, really like to thank the CMS Muslim Network, especially Ali at CMS, who have been integral in making this event, a success. I'd also like to once again thank Samina, who unfortunately couldn't be with us due to technical issues, but she sent her regards and salams to everyone. And a final reminder that anyone whose questions may have remained unanswered, or anyone has any specific Sharia related questions, feel free to reach out to the panelists using our LinkedIn page. Mufti Faraz's email address has been shared in the Q&A box. So, make use of these resources, make use of these amazing people who are giving up their free time to help the community. I hope you all remember us in your prayers and have a lovely week. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.